voice of God calls us to awake in him, how will he find us when he comes?
Awake and ready.
And when he asks us to dedicate our lives ever more perfectly to him, how will he find us?
Awake and ready.
Let's pray together. Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father,
friend, beloved God,
friend, beloved God,
great Master,
great Master,
Jesus Christ,
Jesus Christ,
Babaji Krishna,
Babaji Krishna,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Swami Shri Yukteswar,
Swami Shri Yukteswar,
and our beloved Guru,
our beloved Guru,
Paramahansa Yogananda,
our Paramahansa Yogananda,
saints of all religions,
saints of all religions,
we bow to you all.
we bow to you all.
Be with us now.
Be with us now.
Uplift our hearts and minds.
Uplift our hearts and minds.
Flow through us.
Flow through us.
In everything we do.
In everything we do.
That we may share your light.
That we may share your light.
With everyone we meet.
With everyone we meet.
Let us be your instruments.
Let us be your instruments.
Guide us.
Guide us.
Bring us home to thee.
Bring us home to thee.
Om.
Om.
Peace.
Peace.
Amen.
Amen.
The depths of slumber as I ascend the spiral stairway of wakefulness, I will whisper, whisper. God,
continue to meditate as I share with you our words for this week from Affirmations for Self-Healing on income. Money should be seen as an energy flow, not as something that can be hoarded. For when money is treated as a material reality, it blocks one's creative flow. Money, like matter, is only frozen energy. Energy is what creates matter. It is energy that forever moves, changes, and dissolves matter. Matter, untouched by energy, is inert. If you need to increase your income, know that the energy you put out is more important than specific schemes for earning. Energy will attract opportunity. Recharge your energy from its cosmic source, and whatever income you need will be ever yours. Affirm with me as Yoganandaji taught, first in a strong voice, and then we'll do it progressively softer until in a whisper mentally. The treasury of the infinite is mine.
The treasury of the infinite is mine.
For its wealth is energy.
For its wealth is energy.
And I am energy.
And I am energy.
The treasury of the infinite is mine.
The treasury of the infinite is mine.
For its wealth is energy.
For its wealth is energy.
And I am energy.
And I am energy.
Softer now. The treasury of the infinite is mine.
The treasury of the infinite is mine.
For its wealth is energy.
For its wealth is energy.
And I am energy.
And I am energy.
Now in a whisper. The treasury of the infinite is mine. For its wealth is energy. And I am energy. Now silently. The treasury of the infinite is mine. For its wealth is energy. And I am energy. Now lift it up to the point between the eyebrows. The treasury of the infinite is mine. For its wealth is energy. And I am energy. Pray with me silently. O mighty fountain of infinite light, from whose spray the countless galaxies are made, let me wash away my worldly ambitions in thy waters. Let me bathe in radiant eddies of thy energy. Thou art my wealth. Thou my treasure. Thou my security. Om. Good morning, friends. I want to take a moment to thank Keshava and George and Amy, all of our beautiful musicians. Just the music was so spellbinding this morning. We're so blessed. Today happens to be Swami Kriyananda's birthday. And Swami's whole life, was a creative expression of discipleship. It was a creative self-offering, kind of like those Indian raga players, like on a spontaneous riff. His life was like a spontaneous riff of discipleship. And it was very creative. And the way that you all expressed your devotion was so beautiful and moving. I want to thank you. So this is not Swami Kriyananda, as a younger man. This is Peter. Everyone knows Peter. And I'm Narayan, for those who don't know us. I'm reading from Rays of the One Light. These are weekly commentaries on the Bible and the Gita. And this is week 20, Activity versus Inner Communion. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Last week we contemplated the well-known story of Martha and Mary. Traditionally, this story has been offered to show the two classic approaches to salvation, the first through action and the second through prayer. The excuse of the Marthas of this world has always been, the church needs its Marthas too. Treatises, moreover, have been written to justify the Martha approach to piety, praising her self-sacrifice as perhaps an even higher demonstration of devotion. Thus, do the unmeditative in religion try to justify themselves. Yet the fact remains that Jesus rebuked Martha. Elsewhere, moreover, he spoke of the virtue of feeding the hungry, curing the sick, and housing those who were homeless. It wasn't that he disapproved of serving people. Wrong attitude was the object of his criticism. What he was criticizing was forgetfulness of the true goal of right spiritual action. Good deeds outwardly, without inner communion with God, will result in good karma, but will not bring final freedom from all karma. The path to inner freedom was described by Paramahansa Yogananda in these words: be always calmly active and actively calm. As it says in the Bhagavad Gita, the 2nd chapter, he who is not shaken by anxiety during times of sorrow, nor elated during times of happiness, who is free from egoic desires and their attendant fear and anger, such a one is of steady discrimination. Do your duty in life, so counsels this great scripture elsewhere, but never lose sight of him to whom all action should be dedicated. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om. Om. Om.
Good morning. Let's start with our listener reading. Demand to find God anytime, anywhere. Teach me, O Father, to find Thee in the cave of my heart, that I may walk with Thee everywhere. Teach me to hear Thee in silence, that I may hear Thy voice beneath outer noises. Teach me to find Thee in inner peace, that I may be with Thee calmly in the midst of outer tumult. Hubbub or silence, tumult or peace, I care not, so long as Thou wilt teach me to find Thee anywhere, at any time. I had a talk all prepared, and then I realized it was Swami's birthday this morning, so I wanted to talk a little bit about him first, because he, in a lot of ways, his whole life exemplifies this topic of being with the divine in outer activity and seeing God as the doer, keeping that awareness of the divine and being an instrument for that divine presence in the world. Swamiji was born in Teliaj in Romania to American parents. His father was an oil geologist. Many of you have seen the movies. He talks a little bit about this. But I'm always struck when I see the pictures of when he was a boy that you can see the depth of his soul even then. And apparently he was a very thoughtful child. He was a very joyful child. And he went to school he was sent away eventually to school in Switzerland and then also England. And then they came to America while he was in high school at the outbreak of World War II. And because of that, he never, on some level, he never felt truly at home anywhere. He always was a little bit of a foreigner. Even where he was born in Romania, he was born to American parents, so he wasn't a native there. He was always felt that he was a little bit of a foreigner, and never quite at home. But the interesting thing is, after he met Yogananda, he was tuning in more inwardly into this presence of the divine within. He eventually came to see, even as he continued to travel, he traveled to over 50 countries in his life. He came to see that he could be at home anywhere. He has this beautiful song, "Home is a Green Hill," Home is a green hill, home is a wind, blowing betrayal far, far away. Home is the knowledge that heaven is near. Home is the end of the fray. And so we can begin to find our home anywhere we are in anything. He also, but he really exemplified, like I said, this attitude of seeing God as the doer. One time actually, I was out here in Santa Monica. I came to him, and I was just really feeling bound by the ego, which is kind of it's the whole spiritual path. But I came to him, I said, Swami, I'm really just feeling bound by the ego, feeling stuck in the ego. And his response was very simple to me. He just said simply, the more you see God as the doer, the more you see God doing it through you, the freer you will be. And that was it's very simple, but it was very helpful to me, because this idea of God as the doer had always seemed somehow far away or foreign, or like a leap, too much of a leap for me to get there. I didn't know how to get there. This is charming Calvin and Hobbes comic strip where they're looking at fireflies, lightning bugs, and then in the next frame, Calvin is like bending over and Hobbes is like, your rear is not lighting up, if that's what you're wondering. And Calvin says, I can't even tell what muscle to tense. And that's sort of how I felt. Like, how do I make God be the doer? Like, what muscle do I tense? And but this idea of it being a continuum was really helpful to me. This idea that the more that you see God doing it through you, the freer you will be. And so and of course, with all of the spiritual path, it's a continuum. It's not some great leap. It's just made one step at a time, and just saying, I can open up a little bit more. I don't have to be so egoically defined by what I'm doing, the song I'm singing, or the job I'm doing, or whatever it is. I can visualize God being an instrument, or me being an instrument for the divine to flow through. And when Swamiji was at Mount Washington, actually, he had this really sweet experience that he shared many times with us. He was in his office, which had a window overlooking a garden, and it rained very heavily one day, and mud splattered up on the window. And it was dirty, but he was busy, and for a couple weeks it stayed that way. And then finally he got out there and cleaned the window, and he went back into his office, and he sat back, and he just said, what a beautiful window. But he realized what was beautiful about the window is that he couldn't see it anymore, and that what he was seeing was the garden beyond it, the flowers and the beauty. And so that was the analogy he gave for us to be with the divine in anything that we do. We can be a window for that divine light to come through. And it really just depends on where our attention is in our daily life. It's very hard, but we just have to come back and remember over and over again. There's this really fascinating story I heard recently. Oh, well, actually, I wanted to share first a fun story that Swami would tell before I go into that. It's a story of the Irish farmer, and the priest comes and he's standing with the Irish farmer looking out at his farm, and the priest says, "What a beautiful farm that you and God have created together." And the farmer says, "Well, that may be, but you should have seen it when God had it all to himself." And so it's this idea that God uses instruments. We need to be the instruments for divine light and divine love to come into the world. And sometimes that happens in very simple ways. I was recently just having that prayer of, let me be an instrument for your grace, for your light. And I actually met someone. And I just said hello in passing. I had seen him before, and I was out walking, and I just said hello. And then he continued the conversation just a little bit. We got to talking, and lo and behold, as the conversation went on, he began to share what was going on in his life right then. And it turns out his brother had just passed away, and his niece had just passed away, and his mother was in decline. And he said it was the worst week of his life. And he really needed somebody to talk to. And just because I had been willing to just be like, hey, I'd seen that he was down a little bit and just been able to be a friend, I was able to be an instrument for compassion, for the Divine Mother saying, this one of my children needs a little bit of love, just needs someone to talk to, so why don't you go do that? But in terms of remembering, that's the most difficult part, I find, is that remembrance and the focus. Where is our attention? Where is our mind going? I heard this fascinating story about somebody that is in extreme sports or extreme endurance things, and he had already done this. I don't know what you call it. I think they call it a Grand Slam, actually, where he had climbed the highest peak in every continent already, and he had actually set the record for doing it in the shortest amount of time. I think it was about 100 days he climbed. So that's Everest and Denali and Kilimanjaro and others. And so he had sort of wondered what was next, and he actually decided to walk across Antarctica, unaided and solo. So and it was the first time this had been done, and he was actually successful in it. But what was really interesting to me was that when he's out there, he had some experience of meditation and some experience of what he calls flow states, where he was just in athletics and stuff, when you're really pushing yourself, going into sort of a different frame of consciousness. But what was happening when he was out there, if you think about it, he was completely alone, and it actually took him 2 months to do it. So for 2 months, he was completely alone. And there's no radio, there's no, YouTube, there's no, all this, that's my main, but distraction. But so you're completely alone with your thoughts. In fact, it adds an interesting thing. It's generally like 25 below zero and up to like 80 below zero with the wind chill down there. So even whatever devices he actually did have a GPS at one point that he would check in with from every week or two to make sure he was actually on the right track. But even like those batteries, he had to keep close to his body because it's just so cold, the batteries just die immediately. So anyway, and his camera batteries and stuff like that, he had to have close to his chest to keep them warm. But so as he was going though, what he decided to do, that he wanted to do the best he could to encourage those flow states, as he calls them. And what he was doing was he was being intently focused on whatever he was doing. So one of the tasks that took 3 or 4 hours of every day was simply boiling water, creating water out of the ice, so heating up the ice for the water to drink. And so he would just be very focused on that, setting up his tent, taking down his tent. But then there'd be about 14 or 15 hours a day where he's walking along the ice, along the snow in Antarctica. And he was towing a sled behind him that's strapped to his waist, and that was where he was carrying his gear. And he did this, like I said, for almost 2 months, and but the interesting thing about those days, there's not even any color. It's either it's sunny and the sun is actually orbiting around rather than going over like we're used to it, because it's getting close to the pole, or it's in a whiteout condition and you can't see even the next step in front of him. But what he had was a harness with his compass, because even the GPS batteries, he couldn't be using that all the time because the battery, they would just go dead, right? Because of the cold. So he had a compass on a harness. And so even when he couldn't see the next step in front of him, he would just be looking at the compass, taking one step, next step, and just trying to be very, very conscious of everything, and then just keeping that compass needle right where he wanted it to be. And he would go into these states where 17 hours would just pass like 5 minutes. And he would, and the trip actually, as he got towards the end, he was actually running out of food. And he knew that he looked at his GPS and he had 77 more miles to go. And he said, you know what, I can probably just do it all in one day. He was doing more, like 20 miles a day was more his normal by the end there. And he just decided to do it. He just set off and he just went in. He said it was one of the deepest experiences of his life. He just carried on for 32 hours, I think. He just continued to walk, looking at the compass, until he got to the edge of Antarctica, and he was eventually picked up and went home. But I was really struck by that because all distraction was removed. He's sort of an artificial environment, really. Like not many of us are going to go to Antarctica and do this, or be in that kind of environment where our thoughts can just become that still and that focused and that clear. But we can do that with the techniques of meditation, and we can bring that experience more and more into our lives. But I was struck by that. He had done some meditation, but he didn't, from what I could tell from the interview, he didn't seem like he considered himself that, like he wasn't out to have a spiritual experience. He was just experiencing deeper parts of his own self. And that I keep coming back to that idea of that these things aren't foreign to us. They're very, very much a part of who we are. They're just deeper aspects of who we are. And it's not something that we're not becoming something different. We're just finding deeper parts of our own selves. And so if we can use our meditation and use to find that focus, we can go into deeper parts of ourselves, and we can remember. We can use our focus and our attention more and more to be instruments for divine light into this world. One thing that happened when Swami first came to the Mount Washington was that Reverend Bernard told him that Master had told him to focus at the point between the eyebrows, especially in meditation, because of its power to raise consciousness. And Swami said, well, if it's helpful, should I do that all the time? And Bernard said, yes, of course, that's a great idea. And so in fact, what the masters do, what they say is that instead of, we operate mainly from the ego, right at the base of the skull, at the medulla oblongata. That's where we're referring back to, and if you tune into that, you can feel that oftentimes your energy is sort of, especially when you feel threatened or something, or like your pride feels threatened or something, you're often going back to the medulla. But they say a master operates from the spiritual line, so the more we can just be offering ourselves there, we can be becoming more and more like the masters, and just bit by bit, as our center of gravity shifts there, we can step into that reality and be more and more an instrument for the divine to flow into the world, because we're being more and more in that consciousness. And that consciousness is essentially one of self-giving. It's self-giving. It's infinite love and infinite joy. And one of the reasons that it's so important to give on the spiritual path, give our energy and give our time, is because we need to get into that same wavelength that the divine is on. It's not actually, the divine already is everything. So it's more about us raising our own consciousness and giving and sharing and stepping into that expanded reality where we open up to the realities of others. And I wanted to just share the story of, it was actually my father. He, when he was new at Ananda, he was actually, for his whole life, he was actually working with wood. He was a woodworker for his whole adult life. So he was working in the wood shop at Ananda Village, and he was feeling just kind of isolated. And he, a good friend, actually was Nitai, who came and spoke here about a month ago or so. He came by, and just walking by, and he said, he said to my dad, who was kind of in a mood at that point, feeling isolated, and just was in this little downward, oh, poor me kind of feeling. And Nitai just came by and was like, wow, it's so great that you have this work, that you can just focus on God, you're in this beautiful environment, and just started raving about how fortunate my dad was. And I went, yeah, I can do that. I can focus on the divine, and I can see my work as service and as a blessing to people. Because in one way or another, I think people feel it. If we see ourselves as being instruments for blessing, people feel blessed in one way or another. And it was really interesting to me. Years later, I heard my dad giving a Sunday service, which he didn't do very often, but he was giving a Sunday service, and he was talking about his work. And he just said, yes, when I'm sitting there standing, I'm just chanting Om, Om. So it's something that he had really taken in, and for decades, I just kept turning his focus more and more to the divine. And he was a very, he overcame a lot in his life inside, and he became a very high soul. And he was really an inspiration. We've actually just started our Raja Yoga series that we were doing yesterday, and I realized a lot of what I'm talking about is very similar. Is basically I'm talking about karma yoga, seeing God as the doer, and keeping that awareness of the divine. And one story that occurred to me yesterday was actually the story when I was in my early 20s. I was part of this Living with Spirit group, and we were doing karma yoga in the community at Ananda Village. And there was this, it was in the summer, it was July, it was hot, and I don't do really well in the heat, but one of the jobs that was presented, we were at the Expanding Light that day, the Expanding Light retreat. One of the jobs that was presented was weed eating. And weed eating, especially when the grass is dry, is very hot, dusty work, and the grass just gets everywhere, and you're just hot and sticky, and prickles and all this stuff. And I just really didn't want to, but I was looking around the group, and there wasn't anybody that was, nobody else was more willing than me, and not very many people actually had used a weed eater before. So I realized that it was sort of like coming to me, that maybe it was mine to do. And so I with as much enthusiasm, as much willingness as I could muster, which wasn't very much, but I said, yes, I'll do it. But I had this, thankfully in that instance, I remembered that God is everywhere, and God can flow through me in whatever I'm doing. And so I just tried to focus on that. And it's a very simple task. A lot of times the simplest tasks, like washing dishes or whatever, it's the simplest task that you can remember more what it's all about, and where everything is coming from, where love is coming from, where joy is coming from. And so I was just going with the weed eater, and I had my headphones on, because it's a noisy machine, and I was just going along, and I noticed, I just kept tuning in, and she said, asking the divine to flow through me, to like that, the energy animating my body even was just that divine energy, divine consciousness, and it actually became a blissful experience, weed eating. And in fact, I really had to focus on opening my eyes, because I really just wanted to go inside, but here I was swinging this weed eater around. So it was this balance there. That's, that's the balance that Jesus is talking about with Martha and Mary. We have to still be active in this world. In fact, hard work is very purifying, Swami says. But we can remember, and we can be in tune. We can be in tune with that ray of divine grace, and we can ask it to flow through us and to bless everyone that we meet and everything we do.
Fill my heart with